Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Desi from Clean Air Partnership, and I'll be your host. With me today on the call are Kyle, Harry, and Niall, and I'll introduce them shortly. So welcome to CAC Municipal Building Benchmarking Opportunities. Clean Air Partnership is a Toronto-based organization, and we want to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At Clean Air Partnership, we recognize that Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to climate change and will be disproportionately impacted by its effects. Through our work, we are committed to disrupting ongoing approaches to climate governance that reproduce settler-colonial relations and systematically exclude Indigenous peoples from policymaking. Just a few days before the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we want to remind ourselves and you to listen, learn, and reflect on the role that colonization has played in creating divisions and inequality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. September 30th honors the children who never returned home and the survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. Commemorating the truth of this tragic and painful history is a vital component of reconciliation and a starting point to support people hurt by this history to heal. As part of our acknowledgement, we play short videos in our effort to continue learning. The videos are for and from Indigenous peoples, and I will invite you now to listen one of them.
We need to decolonize the way we interpret Indigenous methods. Here's what I mean.
You're not practicing being Indigenous unless you're fishing from a canoe and hunting with a bow and arrow.
Ever since the beginning of colonization, the Western world has kept Indigenous cultures locked away in the past in a box, where if we don't portray as your classic Western Indian style like in the movies, we're somehow not practicing being Indigenous. Or Indigenous art somehow isn't Indigenous art if it's not all beads and dream catchers. The truth is, we've never existed the same way for the tens of thousands of years that we've lived here. Like the other nations of the world, we adapt, adopt, and evolve our methods and practices to suit us for the time that we're living in. We have engineers, doctors, craft people, politicians, farmers, you name it, all with practices that at the end of every day will always be Indigenous. We're not always going to be the Indian you had in mind. Miigwech for listening.
Thank you for listening. This is just a reminder about our Climate Action Atlas, where you can find ambitious municipal mitigation projects such as geothermal systems, net zero buildings, and etc. And I'll share a link to it shortly in the chat. But now I want to introduce our speakers. Kyle Manny is the Director of Operations at Windfall Center, whose passion for environmental sustainability has led to his blossoming career. With a diverse background in protected areas conservation, outdoor education, geographic information systems, and environmental consulting, Kyle plays a multi-phased role at Windfall, designing and delivering innovative climate change solutions for energy efficiency and stormwater management. Thank you, Kyle, for being with us today. Harry French, as the Program Manager for Climate Wise Business Network at Windfall Center. Harry specialized in facilitating collaborative solutions focused on enhancing community well-being and improving business productivity. Harry draws from a wealth of experience in public, private, and non-for-profit sectors. His invaluable track record comprises past roles as Assistant Deputy Minister in the Ontario Government, Vice President of Planning, and Marshall McLean Monaghan, Director, Community Power Services Group at the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association, and Research Director at the Conference Board of Canada. Thank you, Harry, for being with us. And Niall Halim, as a policy advisor, sustainability for Durham region. Niall's role is to support the implementation of climate action and sustainability initiatives throughout the broader community. He has over 10 years of project development and research experience in the sustainability field across the private, public, and non-for-profit sectors. His background is in community energy and urban planning, and he has an MES and BA in environmental studies. Without further ado, I'm passing it over to Kyle.
Great, thank you for the warm introduction. Just give me a second to share my screen here.
And meanwhile, I will invite everyone when as the presentation goes, you can ask your questions. Please use the Q&A box so that we can better monitor and track your questions.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining today for the webinar on broader public sector benchmarking opportunities. I first just wanted to give a brief introduction of Windfall Ecology Center. So Windfall Ecology Center was established in 1998. We're a nonprofit social enterprise dedicating to building sustainable communities. The vision of Windfall was inspired by a vision of healthy communities where economic, social, and environmental needs achieve balance through social innovation, community partnership, and community action. Our activities focus on repowering communities to create lasting wealth in a carbon-constrained 21st century. We really try to put into practice the concept of thinking globally and acting locally. So on the ground, we have a lot of local initiatives like community engagement, in-home residential energy evaluations, and also provide expertise in areas of renewable energy, stormwater runoff, and transportation. We also support policy initiatives, such as the co-development of the Toronto Net Zero Existing Building Strategy, and have a lot of business initiatives as well, including the Ontario Benchmarking Help Centre, which provides technical assistance to Ontarians in benchmarking through reporting of Portfolio Manager, and the ClimateWise Business Network, which exists in York Region and is soon to expand to Durham, where members are supported with training, carbon accounting platforms, expert action plan review, and public recognition events. And this goes all the way up to international initiatives. For example, we are a member of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. As far as an agenda, I'll be starting off with a walkthrough of our broader public sector data visualization, which is a great first step in data disclosure and benchmarking of broader public sector buildings. And then Niall and Harry will look a bit more broadly at an overview of the Durham Greener Buildings Program, which is a new program soon to be launched that really does help to promote energy benchmarking and reporting, along with stimulating retrofits within broader public sector buildings, but also commercial buildings as well. And then ending off, we'll have some additional time for questions. So I just want to go through a little bit of a background of the broader public sector buildings first. So the underlying data is publicly available through the Ministry of Energy, through their mandatory energy reporting under Ontario regulations. The data set that they provide has a broader public sector buildings from 2001 until 2020 for the data set. And the information in there does have buildings, over 200,000 buildings have been reported through the regulation, and that includes over 170,000 individual times that that buildings have been reported. So the visual itself is designed while balancing simplicity and depth, so allowing for a simple interface to better utilize the data that's publicly available, while also providing some opportunities to look into the data more deeply than through a simple Excel sheet. So the data that we have is on our Windfall Ecology Center website. If you would like to follow along, it's windfallcenter.ca in our data tools section. I'll just navigate here now. But feel free to open it yourselves if you're wanting to take a look. For the visual, I guess I'll just go through starting at the top bar here and some of the counts that are provided. So this provides the amount of individual addresses that are reported within whatever building type you have selected. Right now I have hospitals, but there's a whole list of options such as administrative buildings, schools, art facilities. So clicking through any of these will change the different counts for the addresses that are reported for those buildings. And below is just the times that they've reported. So obviously with multiple reporting years, there'll be multiple times that a building will be reporting their energy use. And then you'll see in the timeline here how that spans from 2011 through to 2020. And for these different graphs, they show the energy intensity of the buildings. So based on your selection, this shows the gigajoules per square feet used within that sector. And we also have another bar graph over here, or sorry, line graph, that shows the total greenhouse gas emissions. So this can provide a total for all, for example, administrative buildings is close to 20,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions. So those are some of the basic features up here, and these are filters. So if you're wanting to look at a specific subset of reporting years, you can select a smaller sample for that, or just select all years. And then there's the building types here, which you're able to choose whatever different building type you're wanting to select. And getting on to the map. So this was made possible through address geocoding, where we took the broader public sector available data and were able to run that through an API to get coordinates and project them onto a map. So these are all of the buildings that are available, and I guess this is filtered on hospitals right now. But by looking at each of these, they have their specific locations on the map. And by hovering over it, there's also some additional metrics that are provided, such as the indoor space for the building. And then there's also a little bit of a gauge that shows the minimum, median, and maximum greenhouse gas emission intensity. So it is standardized by square foot for that. You'll also notice that the dots have slightly different colors. That is because they are symbolized based on their greenhouse gas emission intensity. So ones that are more blue have a lower than average emission intensity, whereas ones that are yellow or somewhat in the middle and ones that are red have higher than average greenhouse gas emission intensity. So just by looking at the dots in general, you can kind of get an idea of certain areas and where they might be more emissions intense than others. And the other thing that you can do with this is by clicking on a specific building, it'll filter your selection to the building that's selected. So this is really great because it shows a timeline of the building's energy intensity and greenhouse gas emissions over the year. So for example, this building that we selected, which is the Branson site, has 9 times reported and can see a pretty steadily decreasing energy intensity for their buildings along with emissions. And by clicking on any other building, you're able to also get a view of their timeline and their reporting history to be able to see a little bit of a trend of their emissions use. We also have the regions. So this one, maybe I'll select something that's a little bit busier, like schools. So with each of the different regions, you're able to click on them, and it'll filter to that area that it's based in. So, for example, the northern region or the central region of Ontario. So you're able to easily filter the data to that selection. It's also sized by the greenhouse gas emissions intensity of that region. So it gives you an idea of which ones are more emission intense or less. And the cool thing that you can do here is that there's a drill down feature. So if you press the drill down button, you can drill down into central Ontario in order to see all of the separate regions that exist within that larger geographic region. So there's Toronto, Halton, Muskoka, and each of these are also showing the average emission intensity of those different regions. And for regional municipalities, we are able to go one further as well. So if we look at Durham, for example, we can get all the way into the local area municipalities. So being able to benchmark, for example, like Brock, Scugog, Oshawa, all of these are able to be seen on the map and compared between the different regions. Um, for example, Toronto that doesn't have that, we can just look at Toronto specifically, but we are able to filter our selection in any way we see fit for that. So this is also just a handy navigation tool, I find. Instead of trying to slowly filter down into a specific region, if I'm trying to get to Aurora, for example, I can just go Central, York, and then Aurora to filter my selection down much easier than it would be by simply scrolling in on the map. So that's the basic functionality that exists within the map that we have. And yeah, I invite you to explore as well. There's a lot of great opportunities to use the map for benchmarking. Some examples are just seeing the total emissions by whatever region that you're looking to look into. So for example, if you're curious on the total greenhouse gas emissions provided by schools within a region, for example, I don't know, Thunder Bay, you're able to get an idea of the actual emissions produced, which is 78,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions. So this is a quick way just to see how much the different building types are actually emitting within the region. And by comparing to neighboring areas, you're also able to get an idea of how one municipality stacks up to another. So yeah, thank you for listening to my demonstration. I do invite you to play around yourself, but for now I will open up to, or sorry, maybe I'll just getting ahead of myself there, mention some of the limitations of the data set that does exist. One thing is if you look closely into the data, you are likely to come across a couple of errors in terms of the data that's entered. That's largely due to the reporting process that's been used in providing spreadsheets with the data that exists. There's not too much filters on what data can be entered and not as much quality assurance. So you can notice that there are some things that exist that have a large amount of, like an erroneously large amount of greenhouse gas emissions or something like that for a data entry. They also only provide annual energy use. There's no way to drill down into monthly data or quarterly data. So just some things to note there. And there is expected to be a transition towards using Portfolio Manager for the data submission of broader public sector buildings, which we do expect to have some improvements in terms of the data entry restrictions and quality of data moving forward from the broader public sector. So yeah, thank you again. I'll open it up to any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Kyle, for this demonstration. You can ask your questions in the Q&A, or if you want, you can raise your hand if you want to ask it verbally, and I can unmute you. And while I'm monitoring for that, I guess I have a question. And it's on the last point that you mentioned about using the portfolio manager. So what is, I guess, why the EWRB benchmarking is not enough, and why do we need an extra, like in your case, your tool?
So with this tool that exists, it is just a tool that provides easier access to the data that's available. Through EWRB, they are likely to come up with some static reports that will show some energy use. But if you're really looking to drill down into specific buildings and the timeline, it's much easier to use through an interactive tool where you're able to drill down, select features, and see how that impacts other things within the visual. Like clicking on one building will show its complete timeline of its energy use intensity. I don't expect the Energy Star to provide something that would go into that much depth as far as a specific building. So you're able just to drill down a little bit farther than I believe you'd be able to otherwise.
Right, and I think that's a segue to actually to the question that we received, which is, can you drill down to a specific building and show the building or profile? And I think you answered that.
Yeah, so with the individual buildings, currently with the profile, we're able to see the square footage of the building, the emissions intensity, the energy use intensity as a timeline, along with the current emissions of that building through all reporting years. So that's currently what is available. So by selecting a singular building, you are able to get a timeline of their history in terms of energy performance. But we don't have any further information than that. We're just working with the data that's publicly available.
Right. And then the next question is, what was the emissions factor used to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions intensity?
I believe the greenhouse gas emissions intensity displayed there is in kilograms, so it would be tons of greenhouse gas emissions equivalent. So it would be an emission factor based on the greenhouse gas emissions, electricity usage, any other fuel type that's used within the building. The specific emission factors that are used by the um, Ontario Energy Board, I'm not entirely certain of. Sorry, I would need to get back to you on that.
That's okay. I know that also TAF has their own research on the intensity. So maybe, Kieran, if you want to just dig in a little bit more, if you want to, a little bit more information, if you want to ask another question, that is more specific on that. Otherwise, I don't see any hands up. Oh, sorry, there is another question. EWRB provides anonymous data. Is there concerns about disclosing this data?
Yeah, so the EWRB data that's provided for commercial buildings is anonymized, so they don't have a specific, you can't get down to the address level. They don't disclose the square footage of the building either. They keep it standardized with emissions intensities and the generic like postal codes for those buildings. So it is something that you're not able to get as far down as this. On our website, we actually do have a visual that displays what we're able to with the EWRB data as well, if you're interested to take a look. But because it's not disclosed as far as the full addresses, it obviously isn't able to drill down as far. Um, so yeah, there is some limitations there, and I would love to see more public disclosure of commercial building energy use. But as I said, currently with the data being anonymized, there is definitely some limitations and concerns there.
Right. And I did share in the chat the link to the website, so you can take a look. I don't see any questions, but if you have more, just keep writing them in the Q&A, and we'll have time again after the next part of the presentation and at the end of this webinar where we can have another session for Q&A to answer. But I guess, Kyle, for now, it's okay to move on to the next presenter.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for listening to my portion. Obviously, the disclosure and benchmarking is just one small part of actually reducing emissions. And I'll be passing it over to Niall to talk more about the Durham Greener Buildings program that we're working with Durham Region to help to stimulate retrofits.
Thanks, Kyle. Hey everyone, I'm Niall. That rhymes. I'll be providing an overview of our Durham Greener Buildings program, of which energy benchmarking is a key feature. And so we're very excited to be able to leverage this exciting visualization tool. Yeah, I guess Kyle, yeah, thanks. So I'll start off with a bit of background on where our project is coming from. We initiated it near towards the end of last year, and over the past few months, we've been working with our Windfall colleagues to refine and develop this program design, which primarily focuses on an energy benchmarking. And so in terms of some background context and the Durham region context in particular, our council declared a climate emergency back in 2020. And from there, our community energy plan, or DCEP, was developed as a sort of roadmap for us to reduce our emissions and achieve our emission reduction targets. And so through the DCEP, we developed our low carbon pathway, which is essentially a set of strategies that could help reduce our emissions over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. So as we see here in our low carbon pathway, retrofitting our existing building stock is the most effective strategy that can yield the biggest emission reductions. So we've been focusing our efforts on building decarbonization strategies to support achieving our long-term emission targets. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key drivers behind our project, first and foremost is our council endorsed emission reduction targets, which requires retrofitting nearly all buildings and homes across the region. So that's quite ambitious, but we've made some headway on this front, primarily through the launch of our Durham Greener Homes program last year. And this program primarily focuses on helping building or other homeowners to retrofit their homes through this energy concierge style service, which handholds them through the process of undertaking a home energy retrofit. And so I should note that the program is focused on Part 9 or single family homes, but we're hoping that we could apply the lessons learned towards commercial and institutional buildings. And so this is where our Durham Greener Buildings program comes in. And in terms of our next steps, we took our final program report to Regional Council earlier this summer, and we received direction and approval on 2 strategic priorities that support commercial and institutional building retrofits. And so the key direction we received from council was firstly to launch a building labeling and disclosure benchmarking program to support energy use reporting, with the key goal being to raise awareness around energy conservation and ultimately help drive demand for energy efficiency retrofits. And so a key part of this process involves establishing this peer-to-peer business network. And this would be modeled around the ClimateWise business network that's currently operating in York Region. And lastly, we received direction to partner with Windfall to implement these program enhancements over the next 30 years. And so ultimately, we hope to build industry capacity in light of looming policy changes. And we also want to support the transition to more sustainable buildings. Next slide, please. So the key objective of our program is to support compliance with Ontario's EWRB program, as Kyle noted earlier. And this came into effect around 2017. And the policy currently applies to buildings over 100,000 square feet, but this expanded to buildings over 50,000 square feet back in July. And I should note that we're not proposing to act as a compliance arm on this policy, but rather our program would focus on raising awareness around energy benchmarking and energy efficiency, as well as to help build industry capacity with the ultimate goal to build this ecosystem that could support building energy retrofits, particularly focused on commercial, multi-res, and institutional buildings. So again, we also want to encourage voluntary benchmarking and reporting of buildings under 50,000 square feet. So we're hoping to support the laggers in the industry. And I should note that right now, our compliance rate is only at a measly 31%. So our ultimate goal is to drive that up and hopefully achieve around 60 to 70% compliance rate. And I should know that this is only for the EWRB program. Next slide, please. So as a bit of background behind what went into our program design, we hired a consultant here towards the end of last year in Troba, who undertook a comprehensive market characterization study. And this helped us get a better understanding and lay of the land in terms of what our existing building stock is, and also helped to identify which particular building types our program should focus on. And so in terms of the targets that we're thinking of for the initial program launch year, because our efforts will primarily be focused on program setup and marketing outreach to get the program up and running, our thinking is that we'd set a very modest compliance rate of 20 to 30%. But as shown here in the red box, we're hoping to ramp up our compliance target over time. And so by the third year, we're hoping to achieve a 60 to 70% compliance target. Next slide, please. And so should note that this benchmarking program is just part of our broader vision to support building retrofits of commercial, multi-res, and institutional buildings. Earlier this year, we applied for the federal government's Deep Retrofit Accelerator grant in order to seek support that would enable additional program enhancements. And so our end goal is to deliver this energy concierge style service that could help build capacity amongst the industry and also drive demand for energy retrofits and deliver them at scale, because given our ambitious climate targets, there's a bit of a gap of where we are and where we need to go. And so we think retrofitting existing buildings would help us make some headway on that front. And so we've got our fingers crossed for that exciting opportunity. And going back to the benchmarking component, we think that this is a first critical step, because by benchmarking energy data, it can help property owners better understand their building's energy consumption patterns, and in turn help identify potential opportunities for retrofits. And so for the initial year, my colleague again will, Harry will drive into more detail, but for the initial year, we're hoping to focus our efforts on disclosing municipal energy data, but from there, we're hoping to pivot and focus our outreach on commercial building owners. And so I think this is a good point to segue into my colleague segment, Harry here, who will provide more details around what the program features will look like. So over to you, Harry.
Thanks very much, Kyle, and thank you, Niall, for that great context. I'm not going to talk a lot about building benchmarking in terms of the values and what benchmarking is technically. I believe most people on this call understand the value of benchmarking and understand the current landscape in Ontario, given some of the questions I heard on EWRB. I also want to point out that EWRB and broader public sector reporting absolutely now more than ever share some commonalities in terms of tools to be used, but they are two different programs. In our program in Durham, we certainly will be integrating both public sector buildings and commercial institutional buildings, but broader public sector reporting and EWRB are different programs with two different guidelines or guides to bring them along. Kyle, what I want to really focus on here, Kyle, can you change the slides, please, is the distinguishing features of the Durham Greener Buildings program versus getting into the technical aspects of benchmarking. And those features are many, but a number of really key ones are our regional-wide community building challenge that we are going to launch for commercial and municipal public sector buildings, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Our real focus on the value of recognition, achieving, taking action on climate change, we'll talk about that. Our support of building owners, both public sector and commercial buildings through the Ontario Benchmarking Help Center. Our peer-to-peer business network, that Niall earlier mentioned, the Climate Business Network, how that will be launched as a chapter in Durham. Our municipal buildings leading the way, demonstrating the leadership to the commercial sector as to the value and the pathways that can be created through benchmarking. Of course, just touch on some of our capacity building tools that we're going to be featuring in our program over the next 3 years. Kyle? I do want to reinforce a point that I've heard both from Kyle and from Niall, that we are building on success. We're building on success of programs that were launched back in 2016 in the region of York in the form of the Climate-Wise Business Network, and more recently in the form of the Climate-Wise Building Challenge, where we conducted a 3-year program focused on benchmarking on commercial buildings and institutional buildings, including public sector buildings in York region. We learned a lot, and we've applied those lessons rigorously to our work in Durham. Next slide, please. Niall did mention this in his comments, but one of the main changes in the learnings that we had from our work in York was to spend more time up front really understanding the market that we're dealing with. There was good information available through some sources, but we needed a more precise understanding and characterization of the market that we were dealing with. And we needed a way to engage the stakeholders in our work. So as Niall mentioned, we worked with a firm in Trova out of BC, now in Toronto as well, to spend some detailed time analyzing the market under a number of different categories. This is just an example of the industrial market, but we looked at all the various building types. We characterized them in terms of who they are, their ownership characteristics, and their typical priorities, and the intent there was to develop value propositions for our marketing efforts as we approached these building owners. We also had an opportunity about developing a working group, or starting a working group of commercial building owners in the community to understand what they saw as some of the impediments and pathways for a successful benchmarking program in Durham. Next slide, please. The program, as we've described, is paralleling the EWRB program for commercial institutional buildings. Again, many of you know about that and the use of Energy Star Portfolio Manager, the creation of EWRB IDs, the process of starting on July 1st of each year, where buildings submit their data through the submission link to the Ministry of Energy, and the process goes on with some checks and balances in terms of data verification and so on. Our process will parallel that, and as we engage with buildings in Durham, we will simply be sending them our submission link, commonly called for a group like ourselves a data request template. So we anticipate, and you should anticipate if you want to apply programs like this in your municipality, this is really no extra work for your participants. It simply is providing some permission, checking off some box, and in our case, we'll be asking for more disclosure information in terms of getting down to detailed building addresses, which is not currently available through the EWRB program, which was a question asked earlier on in Cal's presentation. So I really want to emphasize that. A parallel process, a similar submission link, no extra work for our participants. Next slide. Well, and if there is extra work, we've got a tool to help them. We were successful several years back with the support of Natural Resources Canada to establish the Ontario Benchmarking Help Centre. It did a lot of things at that time in terms of engaging with utilities, as well as a number of other sub-objectives, but its main focus and its ongoing focus is to provide free, at this point for the Durham project, technical help for Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's not about EWRB, it's not about helping them access an ID number, it's about helping them on the technical questions for Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and it will be a service that we're providing free to the Durham region as part of our program. Some cases will assist organizations to upload their data where it's helpful. In addition to that Benchmarking Help Center, which will be a one-on-one consultation, we also had the opportunity of working with the City of Toronto to develop, I believe, award-winning videos on or video tutorials on ESPM. Those are sponsored by the City of Toronto, but they are featured on our Ontario Benchmarking Help Center site and are available to our participants, certainly in the region of Durham, but actually across Ontario. Next slide. We'll be doing many things to help our participants, both from the point of view of promoting the program and from the point of view of helping them understand the retrofit opportunities that may come from beginning with benchmarking and a series of other technical questions and opportunities, even things like green leases. So educational webinars and workshops, engaging with anchor tenants to use their influence to influence the building owners to get involved in the benchmarking program, direct contacts, case studies and study tours, all demonstrating the value of benchmarking and where it can lead. And of course, as Niall mentioned, demonstrating the leadership of the municipal government in benchmarking. So we'll be doing a program which particularly looks at trying to identify top-ranked municipal buildings, and I'll show you a slide about that later on. Next slide, please. It all begins with the building challenge. So yes, we're getting benchmarking information such as greenhouse gas intensity, EUI, site or source, and other metrics. Those metrics then will be used to identify things like the biggest loser in terms of GHG reductions. And this is modeled perhaps on the EPA Battle of the Buildings program, which has been a very successful program in the US. So our intent is to conduct a friendly competition by building type, both for our commercial participants and for our broader public sector participants, all focused on the ESPM ESPM metrics. And now that ESPM is being used by the broader public sector, this should be an easier, a more compelling and friendly, engaging task. Next slide, please. And all this leads to recognition, an annual recognition event, the Durham Sustainability Awards. The title yet is yet to be finalized, but a recognition event which we know that our participants value in terms of demonstrating their leadership to the community. And I have a little bit of a video I want to share with you on that to show what that looks like.
We just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you so much to ClimateWise for this recognition. We're really looking forward to continuing on our sustainability journey and furthering our efforts.
Hey ClimateWise, thanks for the Greenhouse Gas Action Plan Award. We appreciate receiving that, but we appreciate more your help in us reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.
On behalf of Crown Property Management Inc. and True North Commercial Limited, we'd like to thank ClimateWise. We are proud to receive the lowest energy use leadership award in the commercial category. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, Kyle.
We just wanted to take this.
So that's a good example of how our commercial and industrial participants really value the opportunity for recognition. Those awards were made on the basis of metrics generated through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We also have special categories that we are going to be putting in place for our municipal partners in the broader public sector, but at the additional part for our municipal buildings, we'll be looking at top ranked municipal buildings across the municipalities. Here's an example of a number of municipal employees in my community of the town of Richard-Stouffville receiving their top ranked municipal building award. Next slide. So we are focused on understanding municipal leadership and profiling municipal leadership. We know more about those buildings from what Kyle presented with you, and we are engaged with our partners now to feature in our launch event on January the 24th, their successes over the last couple of years using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager data. And the nice part about using that data is that we can get access to it earlier than is generally available on the Ontario data catalog, although fortunately that will change as time goes on and we get into 2024. Next slide, please. A key aspect of this is our very successful ClimateWise Business Network that is been launched in New York region back in 2015, 2016. We are going to create a chapter of that network in Durham region. We're going to change our membership model so that it's more inclusive for businesses in buildings, for those who want to be involved with us as not only Green Economy Canada leaders, but also involved in learning opportunities or advocacy work. And I mentioned Green Economy Canada. Next slide, please. Part in the ClimateWise Business Network in Durham and in New York is part of Green Economy Canada, which is a series of networks across Canada, dominantly in Ontario, who are operating under the same target setting model, a model which we work with members who are or institutional buildings, help them set a target, help them achieve their target, and celebrate their successes. So it's part of a network that the Durham chapter people will have an opportunity to share best practices with and to learn from. Next slide, please. The benefits are clear by being involved in the network, by being involved in educational opportunities that we'll be presenting in Durham. There'll be opportunities for savings for the participants. We support them in understanding what's happening in the regulatory environment and the incentive environment. They are more responsive to employees who are interested in being more engaged in organizations who have environmental, social, and governance objectives. And of course, we're seeing a greater demand by investors and by consumers to work with and support businesses who are part of that. So our network provides our members the benefits here in Durham with the opportunity to feature that to their investors, their customers, and their employees. Next slide, please. We'll help these particular groups more specifically, and we will call them Green Economy Canada leaders, help them get engaged with us, help them measure their footprint more specifically beyond just benchmarking, help them set a target, and then work with them through support tools that are identified in this slide to achieve results. And then, of course, to brag about those results at the annual recognition event. And other media that we'll use, both social media and traditional print media, to feature in the community the successes of these Green Economy Canada leaders. Next slide. So in summary, we're all about, in terms of desired outcomes, we want to equip local businesses and buildings to be ready for deep retrofit projects. There are a lot of things coming up. We want to create scalable and transferable tools and processes for others like you on the line here today can take advantage of in the coming months and years. Importantly, we want to build a cross-disciplinary responsibility for taking action on climate change. Yes, we want to deal with building owners in the community, but we want to deal with their suppliers, their contractors, and their tenants so that there's a broader responsibility for some essential work that needs to be done on taking action on climate change. And of course, we want to meet our metrics. Challenges, there are many, and the complexity of the commercial real estate business is certainly one of them. The issues they've been going through over the last couple of years and are still going through with respect to COVID have really complicated the process, but we're working through that. There is resistance to sharing data, or some discussion about that earlier on, not only metric data, but contact data. We have to overcome some of those challenges, and we've got some good relationships to help that happen. Engaging businesses and tenants in buildings to take action on climate change, reaching out to them is also a challenge, but also I think a wonderful opportunity that we'll take advantage of. And of course, the other challenge is that it just doesn't seem to be the urgency to participate in recognition of some of the existential crises that we're dealing with in climate change that I wish, that we all wish would be more evident in front of us. So we're really excited about this program. We're really excited about building upon our lessons from York Region and from our Climate Green Economy Canada networks across Canada and getting on with this program in the region of Durham. Next slide. We're all about demonstrating a more sustainable economy as possible, and we're all about building community momentum for action locally. So as Kyle mentioned earlier, think globally and act locally is our mantra. Thanks very much, and happy to take questions on this part of the presentation. If we want to venture back to Kyle's earlier presentation on the broader public sector, we're happy to do that. We have a few time, exactly 10 minutes to do that.
Thank you very much, Harry and Niall, for your presentations. Yeah, there are a couple questions, and I will start with the one I think you just covered in the last slide. But are the challenges different of reporting municipal buildings and commercial buildings? The people that need to report, are they different challenges?
Well, if that's questions to me, the challenges on the data side are now using Energy Star Portfolio Manager are equalized, but those challenges are still there. Getting the data from the utilities, uploading it seamlessly into Energy Star Portfolio Manager is still a challenge. So data continues to be a challenge that we have to address. In some locations in Canada, very few, but in some, but more so in the US, there are web services where there is opportunities for uploading data directly. We're hopeful that the launch of the Green Button program in November of this year will be a way of overcoming some of those challenges. So yes, I could go on actually for a lot of other questions around that. But I think now with the Energy Star Portfolio Manager being available for both the broader public sector and the EWRB commercial sector, that will be a more focused opportunity to solve some of the challenges by way of data upload and data quality.
Thanks, Harry, for jumping on this question. The other two questions were, and thanks, Niall, you answered them actually written, but I will ask you if you can elaborate a little bit more on them, and I'll read it for those if you don't see it in the chat. But both questions were similar in the sense of have Durham explored or tested their authorities to implement a mandatory benchmarking program similar to Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver?
Yeah, I can jump in this. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. From my understanding, I don't believe we would have authority to implement a mandatory program, but yeah, I'm not sure. We haven't done a comprehensive legal review or analysis, namely because we did do a literature review and jurisdictional scan of other benchmarking programs, mostly across BC, Ontario, Quebec, and we found that a lot of the municipalities that have implemented mandatory policy were single-tier municipalities that have purview over building permitting and inspections, and that's how typically it's been enforced. So I believe there are building code requirements and limitations as well here in Ontario, but I think going forward, as we launch the program into the future, we can certainly look into that and exploring that legal authority in greater detail. I think for now, though, I think a few municipalities such as Toronto have seemed to work around those building code limitations. But yeah, I think that could set precedent for area municipalities going forward. But for now, yeah, our program is focused on creating that ecosystem and helping to build capacity. But the data that we collect, however, could be used to help inform policy for area municipalities, particularly as it relates to energy benchmarking, energy labeling, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We have time for one more question, and I think it's towards you again, which is what was the main reason for you mentioned in your slides that there 30% is the reporting, but you're aiming for 60. What was the main reason for the gap? And I think that's to you now. Yeah.
Sure, I could start off, and Harry, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything. But it ultimately comes down to lack of awareness and capacity, we think, based on our literature review and interviews with industry professionals. Most of the compliance, I think, has come from the bigger developers and landowners who are often very well staffed and resourced and have the dedicated expertise to report on their energy data, but that's not the case with smaller buildings. And so that's why our focus has been to encourage voluntary reporting and helping to build that capacity internally. Harry, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I think you've touched on Niall for sure. But one of the major issues is literally getting the contact information for the building owners to reach out to them. So while Niall talked about building awareness is absolutely correct, but the challenge is that even at the provincial level is just literally having the contact information to reach out to the commercial building owner. It's a complex sector, and there are numbered companies and there are property management firms, and trying to find the right person in an organization to respond to data requests and to benchmarking requests through EWRB has been a challenge at all levels, at the provincial level, and will be one that we'll have to deal with as well. But our hope is, given the partnership with the Region of Durham and our on-the-ground boots, we'll have a greater opportunity of creating awareness and connecting with building owners to inspire them to be part of the benchmarking program.
Thank you. Thank you for answering this. I think, Harry, the next question is for you. Can you comment about the aggregation services from utilities? Will you work with them to provide the services in addition to the green button? Aggregation services from utilities.
Will we work with them? Absolutely. In fact, as part of the earlier exploratory market characterization study we did in Durham, we worked and we met with the utilities, Alexicon, Oshawa Hydro. We met with all the utilities to describe what we're doing and to develop a process with them. As we launch this process, we'll be meeting again with them now to talk about Green Button. We'll be meeting with them to talk about what they can share with us in terms of helping us to make contact with their customers. We actually did the same thing when we were in York. We worked with Electra, Newmarket Tay Power, and others, Ontario Hydro, and actually convinced them to have EWRB sites on their websites and to link to our Ontario Benchmarking Help Center. So we'll be doing that more aggressively in Durham, and we've already involved those utilities in the development of the program.
And hopefully then, is the green button the idea that buildings will be able to just submit directly from there?
Green button right now, it will allow a building connected to get data from a meter and to download that meter data directly to the building owner, but it's not connected yet to uploading it into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. But there are opportunities going forward. If a suitable API provider comes along, there is that opportunity to do that.
Right. I can probably just like last question, because I see that we are at the end of our webinar, but what are common EE measures being implemented by buildings in your program?
I guess a number of us can talk to that, I guess. certainly some of the common things are lighting, which for the most part has been done. Now we're seeing buildings looking, investigating very aggressively fuel switching opportunities. Moving towards heat pumps. Building envelope, but HVAC equipment improvements is what the most common thing is happening, and more efficient equipment. But not all of them are switching yet at this point in time from to a heat pump process. But behavioral changes, various building owners working with their tenants to encourage better conservation and sustainability measures certainly are another common area.
Thank you. And it is 11 a.m. I don't want to hold anyone more. Thank you very much, Kyle, Niall, and Harry for this presentation. I want to give you opportunity as well if you want to say final words.
No big final words. Just thank you, everyone. It's been a great opportunity and pleasure to present.
I just want to remind people of the challenges that are inherent in the programs, and that's all about communication, getting out, spreading the word within your communities of the importance of starting with benchmarking. We just need to start. We need to take some action, and that action will lead, I believe, we believe from our experience at Windfall, to more aggressive opportunities for taking action on climate change, and get yourself ready for a lot of these retrofit projects that are coming down over the coming years, particularly through the DRE program that the federal government has launched.
I guess building on Harry's point, yeah, we're all in this together. So if you have any questions or suggestions regarding our program going forward, feel free to reach out. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for our presenters and for everyone who participated and for your questions. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar and the slide deck sometime next week. And I wish you everyone a great day today, the rest of the day. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.